page 286. But in view of the frankly mechanical operation of the special board, why have any courts at all? Why use a horse car when there's a noiseless modern streetcar available, which no one can jump out of? It is a matter of keeping the judges well fed. Still, it is really quite indecent for a democratic state not to have courts. In 1919, the 8th Congress of the party proclaimed in its program, efforts must be made to involve all the working population in the exercise of judicial duties. It did not prove possible to involve all the working population. Conducting a trial is a delicate business, but there was no question of getting along entirely without courts. However, our political courts, the special collegia of provincial courts, the military tribunals, and why actually should there be military tribunals in peacetime anyway, and all of the Supreme Courts too, unanimously followed the path of the OSO. They too did not get stuck in the mud of public trials or in arguments between sides. Their primary and principal distinguishing feature was closed doors. They were first of all closed courts, in for their own convenience. And by now, we have become so accustomed to the fact that millions and millions of people were tried in closed sessions and have become used to this for so long now. And then some mixed up son, brother, or nephew of a prisoner will even snort at you with conviction. And what would you have wanted? There's information here. Our enemies will find out. You can't do it. That's the fear that our enemies will find out makes us clamp our head between our own knees. Who in our fatherland, except some bookworms, remembers now that Karakazov, who fired at the Tsar, was provided with a defense lawyer, or that Zhelyabov and all the Narodnaya Volya group were tried in public without any fear that the Turks would find out, or that Vera Zasulich, who attempted to kill the official who was translated into Soviet terms, the chief of the Moscow administration of the MVD, although she missed, and the bullet went past his head, not only was not destroyed in a torture chamber, but was acquitted in open court by a jury, no troika, and then went off to triumph in a carriage. Despite these comparisons, I do not at all mean to say that a perfect system of courts and justice ever existed in Russia. In all probability, an excellent judicial system is the last fruit of the most mature society, or else one needs a Solomon. Vladimir Dahl notes that in the period before the emancipation of the serfs, Russia had not one single proverb containing any praise of the courts. And that really means something. It means likely that they never had time to get around to making up a proverb praising the Zemstva chiefs either. But nevertheless, the judicial reform of 1864 at least set the urban sector of our society on the road toward those English models which Herzen praised so highly. Saying all this, I still have not forgotten what Dostoevsky had to say in his Diary of a Writer against our trials by jury, about the excesses of some lawyer's eloquence. Gentlemen of the jury, what kind of woman would she have been if she had not stabbed her rival? Gentlemen of the jury, Who among you would not have thrown the child out the window at the risk that the juror's momentary impulse might outweigh his civic responsibility? But spiritually, Dostoevsky far outstripped the realities of our life, and he worried about what you shouldn't have worried about. He believed that we had achieved open trials once and for all. Indeed, who among his contemporaries could have believed in the OSO? And somewhere else he writes, "It is better to err on the side of mercy than on that of the death penalty." Oh yes, yes, yes. Excesses of eloquence do not afflict exclusively a judicial system in process of being established. Even more conspicuously, they afflict an already established democracy that has not yet discovered its moral goals. England again gives us examples. As when, for partisan advantage, the leader of the opposition does not hesitate to blame the government for a national predicament worse than actually exists. Excesses of eloquence are a malady. But what word can we use for the excessive use of closed doors? Dostoevsky dreamed of a court in which everything essential to the defense of the accused would be set forth by the prosecutor. How many eons will we have to wait for that? Our social experience has so far enriched us immeasurably with defense lawyers who accuse the defendant. As an honest Soviet person, as a true patriot, I cannot but feel repugnance at the disclosure of these evil deeds." Unquote. And how comfortable is it all for the judges in a closed session? Judicial robes are not required, and one can even roll up one's sleeves. How easy it is to work. There are no public address systems, no newspapermen, and no public. Well, there is a public, an audience, but it consists of interrogators. For example, they used to attend the Leningrad province court during the day to find out how their proteges were conducting themselves. And at night, when calling on those prisoners who needed to have their consciences appealed to. The second main characteristic of our political courts is the lack of ambiguity in their work, which is to say, predetermined verdicts. In other words, you, a judge, always knows what the higher-ups expect of you. Furthermore, there is a telephone if you still have any doubts. And following the example of the OSO's sentences might even be typed out ahead of time, with only a prisoner's name to be added later by hand. And in 1942, Strakovich cried out during a session of the military tribunal of the Leningrad military district, "But I could not have been recruited by Ignatowski when I was only 10 years old." But the presiding judge barked back, "Don't slander the Soviet intelligence service. The whole thing had been predetermined long before." Each and every one of the Ignatowski group was to be sentenced to be shot. Some man named Lipov got included in the group, but no one from the group knew him, and he knew none of them either. Well, so all right, they both got 10 years. How hugely the predetermination of sentences contributed to the easing the thorny life of a judge. It wasn't so much a mental relief in the sense that one didn't have to think. It was a moral relief. You didn't have to torture yourself with the worry that you might make a mistake in a sentence and make orphans out of your own little children. At the predetermination of sentences, sentences could dispose even so immovable a judge as Ulrich to good humor. And what major execution had he not pronounced? In 1945, the military collegium was hearing the case of the Estonian separatists. Short, stocky, good-humored Ulrich was presiding. He didn't pass up a single opportunity to joke not only with his colleagues but also with the prisoners. After all, that's what humaneness is, a new trait. Where had it ever been seen? Having learned that Susi was a lawyer, he had said to him with a smile, "Well now, your profession can be of some use to you. Well, there's no need to quarrel. Why be embittered?" The court routine proceeded pleasantly. They smoked right at the judge's table, and at a convenient moment broke off for a good lunch. And when evening began to fall, they had to go and confer. But who confers at night? They left the prisoners to sit at their desks all night long and went on home. At 9 in the morning they came in all brisk and freshly shaved. Rise, the court is in session. And all the prisoners were given 10-ruble bill apiece. And if anyone should object that the OSO at least proceeded without hypocrisy, whereas there was hypocrisy in instances like the above, they pretended to be conferring, but didn't really confer, we would certainly have to enter a strong, very strong dissent. Well, the third and final characteristic is dialectic, which used to be crudely described in the folk saying, "Whichever way you point the wagon tongue, that is the way she goes." Unquote. The code cannot be a dead weight in the path of the judge. Excuse me. The articles of the code had been around during 10, 15, 20 years of rapid change, and just as Faust said, quote, "The whole world changes and everything moves forward, and why should I be afraid to break my word?" Unquote. All the articles of the code had become encrusted with interpretations, directions, instructions, and if the actions of the accused are not covered by the code, he can still be convicted. By analogy, what opportunities? Simply because of origins, 735 belonging to a socially dangerous milieu. For contacts with dangerous persons, here's a scope for you. Who is dangerous and what contacts consist of, only a judge can say. But one should not complain about the precise wording of our published laws either. On January 13, 1950, a decree was issued re-establishing capital punishment. One is bound, of course, to consider the capital punishment never did depart from various sellers. The decree stated that the death sentence could be imposed on subversives and diversionists. What did that mean? It didn't say. Yosef Vissarionovich loved it that way. Not to say all of it, just a hint. Did it refer only to someone who blew up rails with TNT? It didn't say. We had long since come to know what a diversionist was. Someone who produced goods of poor quality was a diversionist. But what was a subversive? Was someone subverting the authority or the government, for example, in a conversation on a streetcar? Or if a girl married a foreigner, wasn't she subverting the majesty of our motherland? But it is not the judge who judges. The judge only takes his pay. The directives did the judging. The directive of 1937, 10 years, 20 years, execution by shooting. The directives of 1943, 20 years at hard labor, hanging. The directive of 1945, 10 years for everyone, plus 5 of disenfranchisement. Manpower for 3 5-year plans. The directive of 1949, everyone gets 25. The machine stamped out sentences. The prisoner had already been deprived of all rights when they cut off his buttons on the threshold of state security, and he couldn't avoid a stretch. The members of the legal profession were so used to this that they fell on their faces in 1958, caused a big scandal. The text of the projected new fundamental principles of criminal prosecution of the USSR was published in the newspapers. and they'd forgotten to include any reference to possible grounds for acquittal. The government newspaper issued a mild rebuke. Quote, "The impression might be created that our courts only bring in convictions," unquote. But just take the jurist side for a moment. Why, in fact, should a trial be supposed to have two possible outcomes when our general elections are conducted on the basis of one candidate? An acquittal is, in fact, unthinkable from the economic point of view. It would mean that the informers, the security officers, the interrogators, the prosecutors, staff, the internal guard at the prison, and the convoy all had worked to no purpose. Here is one straightforward and typical case that was brought before a military tribunal. In 1941, the Security Operations Branch of our active army stationed in Mongolia was called on to show its activity and vigilance. The military medical assistant, Lazovsky, who was jealous of Lieutenant Pavel Chupenyev because of some woman, realized this. He addressed 3 questions to Chupenyev when they were alone. 1. Why, in your opinion, are we retreating from the Germans? His reply, they have equipment and they were mobilized earlier. They have more equipment. Lazovsky's counter, no, it's a maneuver. We're decoying them. 2. Do you believe the Allies will help? Chupenyev, I believe they'll help, but not from unselfish motives. Lazovsky's counter,